The sound of silence echoes through what should have been bustling construction sites across China's biggest cities. If you think this doesn't affect you, think again. Hit that subscribe button and tell me in the comments if you're ready to discover how China's economic collapse is already reaching into your wallet. What we're witnessing isn't just another market correction. This is the beginning of economic hell for the world's second-largest economy, and the shockwaves are about to hit America harder than anyone imagined. Picture this. Millions of Chinese families staring at empty concrete shells where their dream homes should be. Their life savings vanished into the pockets of developers who promised them everything. The giants have fallen, and they've taken entire cities down with them. State-owned developers will end up running the entire industry. But that's just the beginning of this nightmare scenario that's unfolding in real time. Evergrande was once the titan of Chinese real estate, a company so massive that its collapse seemed impossible. With assets that reached into the hundreds of billions, this wasn't just a business. It was a symbol of China's unstoppable economic rise. The company built entire cities from scratch, creating gleaming towers that touched the clouds and promised prosperity for generations. But symbols can crumble faster than concrete when the foundation is built on debt and speculation. The warning signs were there for years, hidden beneath layers of complex financial engineering and government connections that made Evergrande seem untouchable. When the Chinese government introduced the 3 red lines policy in 2020, limiting how much debt property developers could carry, it was like pulling the pin from a grenade. Evergrande's debt load of over $300 billion became an anchor dragging the entire sector into the abyss. The company that once employed over 200,000 people and had projects in more than 280 cities suddenly couldn't pay its bills. Country Garden followed the same tragic path, another giant that seemed too big to fail until it did exactly that. These weren't small regional developers. These were companies that shaped China's skylines and employed millions of workers. Their collapse sent shockwaves through supply chains that stretched from steel mills to cement factories, from construction workers to architects. The human tragedy behind these corporate failures is staggering and heartbreaking. Across China, over 20 million apartments that families already paid for remain unfinished, standing as concrete monuments to broken promises and shattered dreams. Walk through any major Chinese city today, and you'll see them, half-built towers reaching toward the sky like broken fingers, surrounded by rusting cranes that haven't moved in months. These aren't just construction delays. They're the physical manifestation of an economic catastrophe that has trapped millions of ordinary Chinese families. Liu Wei, a software engineer from Shanghai, put his entire life savings, nearly $200,000, into a pre-sale apartment that was supposed to be ready 3 years ago. Today, he visits the empty shell of his future home every weekend, watching weeds grow through cracks in the unfinished foundation. His story is repeated millions of times across the country. Thousands of real estate projects have been halted or delayed in China. This has increased distrust in the sector, as many Chinese have not received their homes. The psychological impact goes far beyond lost money. It's the destruction of the Chinese dream that promised every family could own their piece of prosperity. These families didn't just lose their homes. They lost their faith in the system that had lifted hundreds of millions out of poverty over the past 4 decades. The ripple effects spread through entire communities as local businesses that depended on new residents closed their doors, and local governments lost the tax revenue they desperately needed to fund basic services. The social unrest brewing beneath the surface is palpable. Homebuyers have organized protests outside government buildings, demanding completion of their projects or refunds of their payments. These aren't political demonstrations. They're desperate acts by ordinary people who followed all the rules and still lost everything. China's real estate crisis isn't contained within its borders. It's an economic virus that's spreading through global financial systems with devastating efficiency. The interconnected nature of modern economics means that when China sneezes, the rest of the world catches a cold. But this isn't a sneeze. This is a full-blown economic pneumonia that's already affecting commodity markets, international trade, and investment flows around the globe. Real estate values continue to plummet. Households in financial distress are being forced to sell properties, and apartment developers that have racked up enormous debt on speculative projects are on the brink of collapse. The commodities markets felt the impact first and hardest. China consumes nearly half of the world's steel, cement, and copper, with most of that demand coming from its construction sector. As new construction projects halt and existing developments remain unfinished, The demand for these raw materials has collapsed. Australian iron ore miners, Brazilian steel producers, and copper exporters from Chile have all seen their revenues plummet as Chinese buyers disappear from international markets. This isn't just about commodity prices, it's about the jobs and communities that depend on these industries. Across multiple continents, the financial contagion is spreading through. International banks that extended credit to Chinese developers or invested in Chinese real estate bonds. European banks with significant exposure to Chinese property markets have seen their stock prices tumble as investors price in potential losses from bad loans and worthless securities. The International Monetary Fund, IMF, warned of a possible decline in China's property market. In a 2024 report, the IMF forecasted China's growth at 4.8% for the year, which is 0.2 percentage points lower than its July estimate. These aren't just numbers on a spreadsheet. They represent millions of jobs and trillions of dollars in economic activity that simply won't happen. The global supply chain disruptions are becoming more apparent every month. Chinese construction companies were major customers for manufacturers of everything from elevators to bathroom fixtures, from electrical systems to decorative materials. As these orders disappear, factories around the world are cutting production and laying off workers. But perhaps the most dangerous aspect of this crisis is how it's positioning China as an increasingly desperate economic adversary willing to use any weapon at its disposal. China is one of the largest owners of U.S. mortgages. There is growing concern that in retaliation for tariffs, the country could sell them, causing rates to rise. This isn't theoretical anymore. It's a loaded gun pointed directly at the heart of American home ownership. The Chinese government and Chinese institutions hold hundreds of billions of dollars in U.S. mortgage-backed securities, giving them unprecedented leverage over American housing markets. If China decides to dump these securities in retaliation for trade tensions or as a desperate attempt to raise cash for their domestic crisis, the impact on American mortgage rates would be immediate and severe. Imagine trying to buy a home when mortgage rates suddenly spike to 8, 9, or even 10% because of Chinese market manipulation. The vulnerability runs deeper than most Americans realize. Chinese investors have also been major buyers of residential real estate in key American cities, particularly on the West Coast. From Seattle to San Francisco to Los Angeles, Chinese money has helped drive up property values for over a decade. As the Chinese economy contracts and capital controls tighten, this flow of investment is not just slowing, it's reversing. Chinese investors are being forced to sell American properties to raise cash for their domestic obligations, putting downward pressure on home values in markets that were once considered bulletproof. In Shanghai, 1 million buys just 474 square feet of prime real estate, a 47% decline in buying power over the past decade, showing how even China's top-tier cities are experiencing dramatic price corrections. This deflation is now beginning to spread to Chinese-owned properties in American markets. The strategic implications are even more frightening than the immediate economic impacts. A desperate China is a dangerous China, and economic desperation has historically led to increasingly aggressive international behavior. As domestic pressure mounts from millions of angry homebuyers and unemployed construction workers, the Chinese government may seek to redirect that anger toward external targets. Trade wars could escalate into something much more serious, as China seeks to blame foreign influences for their domestic economic failures. The same government that once welcomed American investment and trade partnerships may now see them as threats to their political survival. American companies with significant operations in China are already feeling the pressure as the Chinese government becomes more hostile to foreign business interests. The economic integration that was supposed to create mutual prosperity and peace is instead becoming a weapon that either side could use against the other. Although there are some notable positive green shoots, broad-based stabilization, much less recovery, is not expected in 2025. This means we're still in the early stages of this crisis, with potentially years of economic chaos ahead. The human cost of this crisis extends far beyond balance sheets and stock prices. We're witnessing the destruction of dreams that took generations to build, the collapse of trust between citizens and their government, and the emergence of economic nationalism that threatens the global cooperation we've built over decades. Every empty apartment building in China represents a family's broken promise, but it also represents a threat to global stability that we're only beginning to understand. The economic hell that has started in China won't stay contained within their borders. As we've seen throughout history, economic desperation leads to political extremism, international conflict, and the breakdown of the cooperative systems that have kept the world relatively peaceful and prosperous. The question isn't whether China's crisis will affect you, it's how severe that impact will be and whether we'll be prepared for what comes next. The warning signs are all around us, flashing red like emergency beacons in the night. The only question now is whether we're wise enough to heed them before it's too late. Tell me in the comments, are you preparing for the economic storm that's heading our way, or are you hoping it will somehow pass us by? Hit that subscribe button if you want to stay ahead of the crisis that mainstream media isn't telling you about. The economic hell that started in China is just the beginning, and understanding what's coming next might be the difference between surviving and thriving in the chaos ahead.